So Greg and I have had the opportunity to work together for about the last 6 months or so. Right as I was joining A16Z, I got to meet Greg and his co-founder Wiley and do a little bit of work together. And the first time that I met Greg, I was honestly a little bit starstruck. I mean, I'm meeting like one of the two geniuses behind Bored Ape Yacht Club, and I was trying to think of like, okay, like how can I introduce myself in a way where I'm not going to look like an idiot? And so I'm like, so nice to meet you. Tell me about what kind of stuff did you work on before you guys did BAYC? And do you remember what you said?
You can tell the story. Yeah, I don't.
So we're outside shooting baskets, and Greg turns to me and looks at me deadpan, and he goes, "I was the editor of an adult Harry Potter coloring book." And so maybe you can talk about how you went from that to creating what I think everyone would agree is like the biggest original IP company in the space.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I mean, exactly, like, two geniuses, more like two idiots. I was a book editor. That was like the only career I had before starting Yuga with Wiley and my other two buddies, Krem and Zishan. And it came out of the fact that I grew up just wanting to be a writer. I decided that's what I wanted to do when I was 12 years old, and kind of like mapped out the rest of my life at that moment as if like that was the plan. Because what I really liked was just the idea of like owning something from start to finish and like just doing it on your own. It felt like rather than working in a big company or doing something like that like a writer gets to just like do something on their own and craft it over years and put it out into the world. And so I went to NYU because that seemed like a good writerly school to go to, and I got an MFA in poetry at the University of Virginia, and which was an amazing experience, best 2 years of my life by far, just getting paid to just a stipend, graduate stipend, to sit around and write poems all day. And then I couldn't get a job right after that, of course, because I went to school for poetry.
Because you're a writer, yeah.
Yeah, but lo and behold, then I got a job as a book editor, first at a Vintage Español, working on all kinds of Latin American books. And then I fell into licensed publishing. So it was working on like big coffee table books and learning, helping video game publishers tell stories of like how they created, content and that kind of thing. But hilariously, yes, like I went to school for poetry, and in particular read a lot in like translation and wrote a lot in Spanish too. But the most successful thing I'd done was the Harry Potter adult coloring book. It's like it's just a very funny thing to go to school for poetry and do that. But it was like, it sold like a crazy amount of copies to be,
And talk about maybe how, so from there, when you think about BAYC, was there like a single inception moment, or was this one of 50 concepts that you guys thought about and workshopped and ultimately arrived at this one?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long process, and I think COVID was a big part of it. I was, I'd just gotten a COVID pay cut, as I think a lot of us did around that time. So even though, some of these books were selling for, millions and millions of copies, or not quite that many, 1 million copies, book publishing, like everything else, was taking a hit in early COVID, and it left us with a lot of time at home thinking through things. And I remember it was early 2021. Bitcoin and Ethereum had been, the talk of the town again. And I, saw a project taking over crypto Twitter called Hashmass, and it was the end of January, early February, and I texted Wiley because it felt so exciting, because it felt like a moment where oh, here's a non-technical project for the first time that's like center stage in crypto. It says like, from a technical perspective, there's actually nothing that interesting about this. This is actually just content publishing, making use of the blockchain, but meeting it where it is. It's not like Uber for crypto or whatever. It's like, oh no, it's, how does owning a thing as simple as a JPEG change when you introduce like the ownership that we have, like decentralized ownership on the blockchain. And that was exciting. And we started to think about any idea that we could have. And I think the very first thing I was going back recently, found an old text with Wiley where, I said, we should make something. And the first thing we were drawn to actually was like out of copyright, like public domain stuff. Like, oh, is there something with like H.P. Lovecraft or something like that?
Winnie the Pooh, right? You could have done.
Yeah, like whatever. I don't know. I guess like, could have waited 2 years and done Mickey Mouse now or something like that. But and then we had some very dumb ideas, to be honest. And it was only after, it was actually like a month and a half later that we landed on the idea of what we'd eventually do. And that was born out of trying to evolve the idea past like, oh, this isn't an art collection. This is, how do we make something that's like a membership, like a token, it's like a club. But also like not taking ourselves too seriously and trying to do something that felt authentic to like, it felt a little like authentic and like cheeky to the space. It was time of like Wall Street bets and everybody was talking about, aping into stocks or crypto or something like that. And so we came up with the idea for Bored Apes out of that, but also trying to make fun of the whole, like, we're all gonna be rich and go to the moon and own Lamborghinis, and came up with the idea, well, what if the Bored Ape Yacht Club is like a derelict swamp in the Everglades and it's crappy and punk rock and all that. So.
And you've said in other conversations that at the time you were super worried that you were too late to the party, and talk about what was driving that feeling and why that turned out to be it turned out that your timing could not have been better. What do you think were the factors that went into that?
Yeah. So in February, late January, early February, HashMass sold out like seemingly instantaneously in a week for $16 million or something. And then all of a sudden, a dozen other projects sprouted up, half of which I can't remember the names of now. There's one on like Why Fusion was one, and there was one called Chubbies that got in trouble because it turned out their art was like stolen from somewhere. But then the space just seemingly went quiet. Like there was a lot of projects that were trying to mint out that would mint like 300 units of a 10K collection and then hit flat. And so we just thought like, we're done for, this is it. Like, we spent 3 months and which doesn't sound like a long time, but when you're doing it 12 hours a day next to your day job, it feels like a bigger commitment than it does in retrospect. And so we felt like, yeah, I think we felt like the window had closed because it had if we were doing the exact same thing. If we were doing a version of HashMass, then, of course, there wouldn't be room. But that led us to think about how do we do anything possible to land on something that is distinct in some way. And so we came up with everything from doing like a treasure hunt on the very first day. That was like how we opened. It was like an opening pre-sale where we were giving away 1 ETH in a Bored Ape to somebody who could solve these like 3 puzzles. And every person in our Discord didn't care about minting Bored Apes at all. They wanted to win the 1 ETH. Including like some of our like most long-term members like originally came for that express purpose, because we basically said we will bribe you with $2,000 to be here.
Yeah, come for the contest, stay for the NFT.
Yeah, and the NFT was worth $200, the ETH was worth, 1,400 or whatever it was at the time. And we also just started to realize, like, what else can we fix? Like, if everything, doing the same thing that everyone else is doing isn't working, then how do we flip it on its head? And so instead of doing these kind of bonding curve sellouts where people would say, the first 300 NFTs are a certain price, the next are more expensive, and on you go, we said everything costs $200. We thought it would be interesting, if you own the JPEG, then you actually could own like the IP to this thing in a certain way, and so we threw that in too. And what would this location look like? It's not just 10,000 apes. You're actually, how can we like create this world and this like little bit of a story around it? Let's add that as well. Can we make special ones and tweet them out at influencers? Let's do that too. Like, we just basically went down the list every single day of what else can we do, given the fact that we don't think this is gonna go anywhere. And also, I think part of it was when we landed on Bored Ape Yacht Club, it was just such like an absurd, silly name and idea that I just remember like walking around the neighborhood thinking like, yeah, if like this goes nowhere, at least like it's a pretty funny story that like we tried to make a club in the swamp for apes on the internet, and like that's how we spend our summer.
That's awesome. I remember, I don't think I've told you the story before, but I remember talking to Alex and Devin, the two OpenSea co-founders. This was probably August of 2021, and I asked them, I'm like, okay, how do you tell the difference between a high-quality NFT project and a run-of-the-mill project? And they said that, they're like, well, with BAYC, all you had to do was look at the Discord, and you could just tell there was a level of creativity and energy and engagement that you hadn't seen anywhere else at that time. And I think that if you look at, everything looks super organized and like it was all destined to be in hindsight. But at the time, you guys, after BAYC did Mutant Ape Yacht Club, Bored Ape Kennel Club. More recently, you did the Trials of Jimmy the Monkey. You've had this, I'd say, succession of just incredibly creative innovations in the process. Talk a little bit about how first as a small team and now as a relatively large company, how do you keep that creative juice flowing and to just kind of continue to delight your community again and again?
Yeah, starting at the first thing you said, I think the Discord is so important. I think for all of crypto, like Twitter and Discord, and certainly any business or project that's trying to be community focused, like 80% of the work in those few months, like that happened in Discord and not like externally. And I think that's weird to say, like, crypto's a little like anarchic, obviously, and libertarian, and people don't like rules or anything like that. And managing a Discord, finding a way to like build a community in like that kind of space is tricky. And the only way we did it was we were there in it 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day, talking to people, joking around with them, trying to set like a fun tone, like, hearing about what other people were trying to build, participating in that, fielding like DMs about any number of things. And I think that's been, a huge blessing for us, is that community that was born out of Discord in those earliest months. So like some of our best employees, our absolute best employees, most important people came straight out of there. And because like that, when we're talking in crypto, like the economies of scale here are so small. It's like some of the data is like Yuga is like 70% of the top 10 like NFT collection volume of all time, yet our holders is lifetime like 60,000 or something like that. And so that's not that big that you can't know a lot of them and just meet them and be there for them. And yeah, I think like Discord was a huge part of it. And in terms of like the creative energy, I think, Wiley and I were both writers, and we just we had certain ideas of like, how do we do something that we feel like is very high effort, that there's like, you could just go to the BAYC website and it felt like there was just more there than there was on other places, and more like love of detail and that kind of stuff. But it is like not taking itself too seriously, because that's like the death knell, I think. And how do you communicate to your community in a way that's authentic, but not like, I don't know, like you can never pat yourself on the back and like, we started from nothing, and there's never been one stupid rocket ship emoji ever or anything like that. Because if you're like authentic and like plain face in that way, I think it's infinitely better than these like momentary blips of trying to like create hype and all that, which just accelerates the downtrend.
Yeah, no, I think the job that you guys have done of staying, I think, true and authentic to the like original organic vibe of the community with everything that you've put out has been pretty amazing.
Thank you. And like so you mentioned like Bored Ape Kennel Club, like that was a special one because that was a month into the project, and it was just like, how do we do something surprising and have fun and reward people? Nobody had gifted away 10,000 NFTs to a community that already had an NFT before, and we had no idea how it would work, if these things would have any perceived like interest or value ascribed to them. And the idea just came straight out of like, I didn't have a dog. I wanted a dog. My wife didn't want to get a dog. She still doesn't really want to get a dog. She knows I work too much to take care of the dog. But so it was like, how do we, what if we gave everybody like an imaginary like NFT? And what if we did it for free? And what if we did, to really underscore that this was just like a fun moment, and just about like creating community and engagement, we decided to donate all of the royalties associated with it to animal charities. And yeah, so it was like a month in, we'd done, a $2 million mint, and then we ended up raising $1 million for animal charities right after that. And yeah, it was like huge. There's still to this day a nonprofit called Orangutan Outreach that does a ton for orangutans in Borneo, and they bought a Bored Ape soon after that because we donated a bunch of money to them, and the founder wanted to like be part of this thing and support it, and then they ended up making like even more because then they
off the appreciation of their ape,
$600 or whatever.
Oh, that's amazing.
Anyway,
cool. Let's talk about. So we've talked about some of the good times. I think you guys, like everybody in the space, have faced probably more than your fair share of like oh shit moments. Talk about one that really sticks out in your mind. What was it? How did you navigate through it, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, it's difficult to just find one, but I will say that like Wiley and I would talk to each other a lot about how our job as founders, we felt like was to eat shit sandwiches. Which is like, oh, this is like a very painful thing that like I do not want to do, but it's best for like the company or the community if I do it. So like that's what we're gonna do, and that a lot of our job as like co-founders was like keeping each other honest to like do that. And I think the times that we've been able to be true to that spirit and also push ourselves to like to do it authentically, like how do you throw your arms around a thing rather than kind of get timid about it? That's been good. And where we've fallen apart is only when the ones that keep you up at night are it's like, oh, you took somebody else's advice on
Yep.
the idea. Like if it was your own screw up, like you can fall asleep. But if you did something because like a PR person told you or something like that, it's like that. Those
Right.
those
You
that
did it against your own
better judgment. Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about where you guys came from and the tremendous success to date, but I think that what you've done so far is only a sliver of what your ambitions are going forward. So talk about what you're doing, what you're building with Other Side, and what you think that could become.
Yeah. I mean, we're in this transition period moment where, the things that Yuga is historically extremely good at is like content, creative, and community. We have a very, our engineering team crushes it and delivers things very fast and is amazing, but that hasn't historically been like what we're known for or anything like that. And yet now we're doing things, doing more and more in gaming. We did Dookie Dash a couple months ago, and we did Other Side Second Trip, which was 7,000 concurrent users in one space. So, kind of exceeds the monthly active users for a lot of metaverses in just like the 2 hours that we were getting people in there all together, which was special. And I think what I think about a lot now is like, how do we build these very complex, ambitious things, but in a way where we're doing it in public and doing it actively and constantly like showing pieces of it. Like the whole like crawl, walk, run is like the motto, where with Dookie Dash, for example, crawl, walk, run, and kind of managing expectations. So Dookie Dash was a game. It's a simple game. It's an endless runner game. You had to kind of ride a jet ski through the sewers and dodge things and collect stuff. And
No, it was a super well executed version of that.
yeah, and that's like, I think that's the sweet spot, is like, how can you do something that's like fun and feels like a well executed version of a thing, rather than trying to do something, setting the bar too high and not being able to manage expectations and failing. And so I think Dookie Dash was amazing as what we wanted it to be, which is a skill-based mint. It was a moment for people to kind of, compete in essentially this like global arcade game to achieve, what NFT you're going to use for the next activation. And similarly for Other Side, we think a lot about like, okay, how do we build alongside the community and have these building blocks of like these moments where we can open things up and do special things, and then improve on that and do it again in 2 months and in 2 months and have something like more and more active. And I think I'm excited about Other Side because we're really at the point now where we have several different teams, like, internally and around the world, each like building different parts of the game consistently. And I can be in like Zoom meetings now and like have Other Side on my second screen and just be like jumping around, flying around, messing with stuff. And it's a
And when you dream big about what it could become, like how do you what role do you see it playing, for Yuga in crypto in general? How would you think about it in comparison to some more traditional things like Fortnite or other large immersive worlds? Like where does it fit in your mind?
Yeah, I think so. Discord and Twitter are incredibly important. I would love for people to want to engage with each other more deeply in Other Side. I also want it to be like a meta layer that sits above NFT communities for people to come together and like, I want Pudgy Penguins or whoever to be able to build a space for themselves there without my permission, without like, in the true crypto permissionless nature, that can engage their community in the best way. And then for them to be able to derive value from that. And so whereas like, Meta or somebody else might want to take 30, 40, 50, 60% of something, how can you keep the margins extremely low, keep it permissionless, and have it be like, Web3 enabled on like those open rails in that way, so that you can just be the best option for creators. Fortnite is amazing. The Unreal, like the Fortnite creative mode is bonkers. It's so cool. That said, you think about things like YouTube creators. It's hard as like there's a lot of people who can make like hundreds of thousands of dollars or even like millions of dollars on YouTube as content creators. But if you talk to those people, they're like deeply unhappy with YouTube and scared. And they feel like they've built their business on like a powder keg. And if you're going from like and there's rare, it seems like somebody who's able to take $1 million business built on YouTube and make it $1 billion business. Like that doesn't happen. Whereas I think with other side, part of the vision is how can we make it so that somebody can build a business that can scale past what like a Web 2 business can enable, because it's built on these like open rails and interoperable in these ways. And so there's a lot of like devil in the details for all that stuff, but like that's part of the North Star is that's guiding us.
Amazing. And actually, as you guys have marched down this path, you've had to really recruit a set of talent. I mean, like most recently, Mike Seaver is your new CTO, who was CTO of Epic. Most recently, or
Ryan, yeah,
Ryan, yeah. How have you done that while still keeping the culture intact that sort of made you guys what you are today?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways that we think about culture, and it's hard because the tricks you use for like the last jump in like size of company don't work for the next one, and so we keep leveling up like how we do these things. At first it's like, okay, we're gonna have more frequent all hands and all that, but at a certain point, like, we've hired 7 people in the past 2 weeks, and I've met 2 of them so far. It's like it's hard to keep up with this stuff, and so some of the things that we've been able to do though is like. Number one, it comes down to the kinds of leaders that we bring in. It's like people that understand what they know and what they don't know. It's like the worst thing that you can have is somebody that's very confident in what they think Web3 is when they haven't been kicked in the head in a Discord 10,000 times. So I think that's a big part of it. And also making sure that some of the people that are most that came out of the community, that they're part of the company now, that those people are continually elevated, and working side by side and kind of onboarding people. Like, for example, Daniel Allegre, our CEO, he came from Google and from Activision Blizzard, extremely, entrepreneurial within some of these bigger companies and starting Google China or working on payments, or starting Google Latin America or all these different things. But obviously does not have the same Web3 experience as most of the people like on the team. But his ability to kind of synthesize and learn from other people has been integral. And at the same time, like I think that's where like the early people that we brought into the company have been most important. And the ones I'm most proud of are the ones that just were like anonymous people in Discord that were like giving their lives to this community as like mods, or like just first as like people in the Discord just helping out, and then as like paid mods, and then eventually part of the mothership. I'm just immensely grateful to like that cohort, and I feel like they're the ones that really carry the culture for everybody else. And I think the worst thing that could have happened though is if those people stayed. Those people have now, like, you got to kind of tear them away from Discord and from the community sometimes and say, no, actually, you're going to go like be head of like this thing over here, and that's important.
And you always want to go back to your comfort zone in times of stress, right? And
or just like they love it, like that's what they want to be part of that. But at the same time, like they're infinitely valuable, I think, in helping carry the culture, and also like we have the other thing I think we've done was been important from day one is like we really feel like good ideas can come from anywhere, and like testing things, and very obnoxious. I'm very obnoxious around like polling everybody on like red or blue kind of thing, and it can kind of be funny if like you hire like a hotshot creative director from like an agency or something like that wants to be like creative director with like capital C and capital D. And you're like, no, I want to know what like PP Man has to say about this orange or whatever. Sometimes they can be touchy.
Right, they like to control the taste, taste and the style. And so as you think about what you're building towards in the future, and you evolve, the company makeup, the culture, you think about bringing Other Side to life. Is there something in particular that keeps you up at night? I'm sure there's many things, but like, what would be one thing, and how do you turn your anxiety into a positive momentum in the company?
Yeah, Other Side is hugely ambitious, and it's like just there's more people that are going to be working on that than anything else in the company, and it's going to just keep growing. And so it's tricky. I just think about who's hiring for Other Side is like my biggest thing, and process, because just trying to think about the things that like scale, but as part of that too is like, yeah, how do you teach a game designer who doesn't know anything about Web3 like the principles of this thing in a way that they can grok quickly and not just put their foot in their mouth and design wise or otherwise. And that's and the way I keep doing that, I think we keep elevating people up, essentially out of the community of mods or other things, and trying to put them like in positions of power as like checks and balances on this stuff.
Yep.
And the best people that come out of Web 2 embrace that, love that, take it to like fish water, and then they join in. And if they're not, you just got to find a way to move on and find somebody that will. So yeah.
I guess maybe one last question for you. So you've had a tremendous journey and ride. It's only actually been 2 years, right, since you a little more than 2 years since you launched. But I mean, I think it's come a tremendous distance. As you think back on the journey and the decisions that you've made along the way, sort of anything that, with the full knowledge of hindsight, you would do differently, or advice that you would give to the crypto startup school team as they embark on what you guys started?
I mean, I think you all have like a massive leg up on so many stuff with this group, and just the connections just in the room among you probably. We started like, I had no idea how to do anything business wise in terms of like, and the weirdest thing was, even when we started like made money and like could throw money at the problem, like couldn't find an accountant that would even want to work with us. They were like, what is this? What? It's a swamp club for apes on the internet? Go away. And I was like, I'll pay 10 times your hourly rate, just like do my taxes.
And nobody would do it, right?
Or they said they would, and then you wouldn't hear from. It was a disaster. So like, yeah, my wife learned QuickBooks to be our first accountant, and like there's all kinds of weird stories like that. So I think looking back, it's funny. Like, yeah, I didn't know how equity worked until like we were gonna raise a pretty big valuation, and then like, so I think part of it has been like we were just kind of segmented in our little hole for a long time, and we didn't know anybody. We were just focused on what we were building, and we were just talking to our community on Discord. I think the like outward networking and connections and investor relations and all that kind of stuff, like we were just late to that game. And so I think that was probably a mistake. And the other thing is just also trusting your gut more, like because we had that, imposter syndrome of like not knowing what we didn't know. You might think that like, oh, somebody who, has run XYZ company is going to come and help us on this thing or that thing. But, some of that stuff doesn't work out. And having somebody that like, just finding the right people that are like, if you're lucky enough to have a community at the start, like finding people like out of that community is just, I'll sing those praises all day. Because we were finding people that were just like mods that I would send, mods, and we were hiring for like community managers. And so we'd say, hey, I don't know what your situation in life is. I don't even know your real name or anything about you. But if, you want a job, we can pay 60 grand a year, or whatever it was going to be at the time. But like, don't be offended if like you're a hotshot. And sure enough, we'd have like, one of our best employees to this day, he was like a VP at a bank. But before he told us that, he was like, yes, I will take your job for 60 grand or whatever, because he like believed in it so much. And yeah, so just like finding the good that's already like forming around your company, and the crypto is a very small space. So like there will be people that show up in your Discord, just get to know them and find the good and like nurture that, those relationships, because those have been the most worthwhile.
Hi, Greg. Jay from Ethan ID. Thank you for the wonderful talk.
Thank you.
My question is concerning that tension between speculators and hodlers, for the true believers in your community. I'm curious how you negotiated that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's always been around like the secret is then like, don't try and make like a pointy moment. Try and keep it sustained. And and that way, if you're not shouting out like, we're about to do something spectacular, rocket ship emoji, moon emoji, whatever it is, like that's a like, that's catnip for speculators. And we just try to be very upfront about like managing expectations on like what we would be doing, and being authentic with the community, and like engaging with people. Like if you're talking to people day in and day out and they're part of your community and you're in Discord with them, like they want to stick around. This is more than just like an NFT, just a $5,000 NFT or whatever it is to them. And if you're thinking about what that person wants and what that person needs, that's a much better signal. Wiley would talk a lot about like, what the person who's still holding an ape to this day, who bought it for $200 2 years ago, like, what's that guy like, and how do we build for that person in mind? Of course, some people might get mad and be like, oh, but I've just bought my ape last week for X amount of money. But like, I think having that long-term view has been very healthy for us, and something that we think about a lot.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Greg, thanks for the talk. This is Jess from Blockus. We build Web3 gaming infra. First of all, I just want to give a shout out for that creator to Web3 like founder moment. I think that's super awesome. Like creators for the longest time like did not get the spotlight that way. So I feel like NFTs really brought that out, and that's like super cool to hear your story and just see that trend in general. My question is really around how do you think about scaling community, right? So if you look at the actual PFP holders, there's like a couple tens of thousands, but for a big, you guys are leaning heavily into gaming. So for a big MMO, you need a couple million concurrents, right? So how are you thinking about scaling and growing that community?
Yeah, I mean, that's like the giant question like that everybody's thinking about, of course. Honestly, for me, I think more about like, how do you do it in a sustainable way? So to me, it's around like, how do you do this in a way where everything that we say about Web3 gaming, which is like, hey, it's the same, except you actually own your assets and you take custody of them. It's like, instead of Magic the Gathering Online, where it's like, you don't actually own them, it's like real Magic cards where you do own the Magic cards and you can take them home with you. Like, how do we keep that part of it like safe and alive, and keep out a lot of the speculation or the feeling around safety and security that's what kills scale actually. And so for me, it's like we think a lot about like design and UX and UI stuff around that, and like communicating extremely clearly. Like if you follow us on Twitter, you'll notice like every single tweet we put out, we say, and this is the last tweet in this like series of tweets, and any tweet under this is a scam because Twitter's like completely broken. And we have like a blog that is the most, our news site is actually like hilariously bad for new people coming in, but it's very good for people to know whether they're on the right site, so they don't like click a bad link when they're excited and get their Bored Ape fished. And so to me, it's like, as we start to solve some of these infra problems and like UI, UX things and wallet stuff, a lot of these other problems will get easier. Like we already saw what massive demand for a thing that wasn't like properly meted, when the infrastructure wasn't there to meet it, look like. And what that looked like was a lot of people getting their assets stolen.
Hi, great talk. I'm Marielle from Mentaport. We're the platform that does geolocation for Web3. You mentioned Discord a lot, and I'm wondering, do you have any tips to start that Discord community?
Yeah. I don't know how, I'd probably be the worst person to ask because I know so many people I get DMs even like, oh, I want to be a moderator for your Discord now or all that. And I'm like, I don't trust you at all. I have no idea. Like, this is Scam Central. When we started, it wasn't like that. It was easy enough to find people that were being authentic and that you felt like you could trust and all that. I will say, I think the best advice around moderation is important. I know the Forgotten Runes guys, they said once, they made a decision to moderate their Discord like it was like the living room of their house. And I think that's great. It's so you've invited this person into your house and so they're okay to be there, but what are you okay and not okay with this going on here, and treating it that way, I think was a really good just North Star on what's gonna fly and what's not gonna fly. And then finding the right moderators with the right sense of judgment. One of our absolute best moderators, our first paid, community manager, we offered her the job after she was a volunteer moderator helping out, and we were astounded how good she was at this. And we're like, "What? Can you come full time, work for us? We think you're amazing. Tell us about yourself." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm a third grade teacher." And I was like, "Oh, this makes total sense of how this is working here." And yeah.
Awesome.
Hi, thanks for your advice. I'm Nikita with Chain Patrol. We actually stopped phishing attacks targeting communities with a wallet block list. But my question actually isn't related to that. I was interested in, other side, and it has some MMO aspects or some of these areas, but I'm a heavy gamer, and a lot of MMOs, they built years in advance, and they have a long roadmap, and they basically tell you exactly what they're going to give you, and you've kind of taken an inverted almost approach here, where it's kind of it feels like the roadmap is giving out in pieces. And one, how did you decide to go through that this kind of inverted approach, and how do you keep your community excited while and also having faith in that you're going to kind of deliver everything?
Yeah, I think we've been blessed that we launched Other Side after we'd done a lot of stuff to build up our community, and I think part of it too is we want this to be a creator platform, in addition to having essentially thinking about two different modes, creative mode and campaign mode kind of thing, and doing those two things in conjunction has been tricky, but I think we have the right roadmap for that going forward. And to me, it's also around creating special moments for other people to participate in, and hopefully have a much more active role in building alongside us. We have a lot of engaged creators that are constantly 3D modeling different things and testing out how they might look in our world or any other world. And as we start to open up the doors for more and more developers, starting with more pro ones and more amateur ones, I think that's going to be the virtuous cycle that keeps them going, because that's what we saw also with BAYC and anything else, is that the best way to build a community is to give them stuff to do, and ownership in a thing. And with BAYC, that was as simple as, this is your ape, you're part of this club, and you have the IP rights to this, and you can launch a business off it or do whatever you want. And that was much more powerful than we could have imagined, and a lot of stuff has come out of that.
If I can ask just one more quick question.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on PvP in this space? Playing, with Pokemon cards, playing for keeps, or RuneScape Wilderness, where you go and lose all your gold to somebody that killed you. How does that what are your thoughts around that, where these assets are worth thousands of dollars?
Yeah, it's tricky, because the other thing that's going on that's underneath that question, I think, is cheating. You know, anytime you have like huge stakes like that, cheaters are highly incentivized. And there's no game out there that hasn't, people don't find a way to cheat. And so I think it's a constant like negotiation of like, all right, how do you create spaces for people to opt in to like, hardcore, like red server mode or whatever it is. And how do you punish people, like keep the incentives properly aligned so that, you don't spin out and have like a horrible situation where, cheaters are winning assets for crazy amounts of money and you have no way to intervene.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Great talk, Greg. I feel like ever since we got into CSS, it's just been a bunch of frameworks and mental models of how to build a startup. I'm curious if you have any sort of particular mental models or frameworks that you use on a day-to-day basis for making decisions when it comes to Web3 IP or running Yuga as a whole.
That's a good question. I think some of the refrains that we would have, they're like, I don't know if it quite qualifies as a mental model, but it's like kind of just constantly asking yourself if like you were being authentic to your community in that moment. Are you, we put together a list of like 10 ways of how we like to communicate. For example, like when we realized we were getting, big enough that we weren't scaling how we talk. And so it was as simple as like, never pat yourself on the back, and like you don't take victory laps. Like if you do something right, then the community will celebrate and then you can celebrate alongside them on the moment. But like if you're, celebrating at first, it just looks bad. And I think a lot of times it's also just trying to think from a founder perspective, like, are you actually doing the thing that can scale? That's actually like the hardest thing you should be working on at that moment, or are you doing the thing that's like you're more comfortable with? I think for the first year, it was very easy to like wake up in the middle of the night and feel like, oh, I got to go work on this thing right now, because no one else is going to do it. And then you can fall into a place though where it's like, cool, well, there's 130 people working here now, and like, a bunch of them are executives or other things. Like, surely someone has thought of XYZ, or like you just tell part of your brain that like somebody's got that. But I don't know. I find that it pays to be paranoid and a little crazy that way.
I'd add just like looking from the outside that you and Wiley both have an unbelievably high bar in terms of what good looks like, and you're unwilling to compromise in terms of nothing gets out the door, I think, that doesn't meet that bar, and that's hard to maintain that and unusual. But you guys do it great.
Yeah, and I think that's the last thing is like to having a co-founder that can really push you and that you're pushing them constantly. That was always like Wiley and I were extremely codependent and crazy with each other. We would literally be talking through every decision for 6 hours on the phone every day. Because to us, especially with Web3, like the decisions that you make are just the start of an interaction. Like if you're basically creating rules for an ecosystem, and if you're not being thoughtful about that, then your ecosystem can spin out in all kinds of unhealthy ways. And so some things as simple as like who we would ban for the Discord and from what in those early days, like we might argue about that for like 6 hours before we did it. But hopefully out of that, we would come up with some like general idea of like, okay, that's how we're going to handle this. This decision will scale. We're not going to argue for 6 hours every time we ban someone, but like we needed to do this today to feel good about this going forward.
And just as a follow-on, you brought up the keyword authenticity. Is there any way to quantify authenticity, like any KPIs or metrics that you look to measure authenticity?
No, and we're really bad at KPIs, where I am, and Wiley is. Like, we were both writers, and I was a poet, and like it just doesn't work for my brain that much. It was more just about like, does this feel phony? Is this fake? Am I like mimicking what somebody else would do? And some of our most successful moments were coming from like, okay, how do we remind ourselves and other people that like about something that makes us unique? Like the leading up to like the Mutants drop, it was like the tweet was like, fuck it, Mutant Saturday or whatever. But it was important in that moment for us to be like, yeah, we're just four idiots in a room trying our best here, like nonstop. Like we're not a big corporate thing. We shouldn't treat it that way. And so trying to be, like intentional around how we interact with our community, I guess, and be authentic.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you one more time for Greg.